My name's Nathan Brown. Welcome to Edge TV. Our E-word of the week is environmental. And of course we're talking about things like creation and all of those good things. Environmental, according to the dictionary, of or relating to an environment. Wow. Or of or relating to the natural environment, its protection and conservation. The Bible begins with a simple statement: in the beginning God created the world. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about on this episode of Edge TV. But a question to kick off: have you ever hugged a tree?
I have, with a group of 27 people. It was the biggest tree in the redwood forest in Northern California, and it took our camp meeting in the Northern California is in the redwoods, and you have to drive right through them. So we took our youth group up and surrounded this tree, and it took 27 of us stretching and holding hands to go around the base of the tree. It's a huge, mammoth tree. So we hugged a tree, group hug.
Yeah, good stuff. Anybody else want to admit to hugging a tree?
I will now.
That's a cool thing. Very cool. Well, it's lucky we provided a tree for you.
Thanks.
Jared?
Yeah, I think I have at some stage. I've punched a tree, kicked a tree. I got
That's not very nice.
It was.
Did you apologise?
Yes, I did actually. I was in primary school and I had a brain loss of anger, you know how it is, and I thought rather than taking out my anger on a person, I'll punch the tree.
Isn't it good that trees are tough?
Yes.
Adele, have you ever hugged a tree?
Yeah, we used to in primary school. We had sort of, you know, Easter stuff, and we'd always make these little Easter nests under the trees out in the yard, and you know, you hug the tree to say thank you for all the Easter stuff, even though it was actually the school principal who'd dress up as the Easter bunny.
Remarkable.
Way back in the day.
That's
strange.
Kind of strange.
Yeah, it was obviously all the pine sap that had, you know, got into our brains after a while.
Indeed. Not such a bad thing to hug a tree. I guess we'd recommend it from those stories. Cool stuff. To get us thinking a bit more about creation and the world around us, we asked a group of young people some questions about that particular issue.
I love it when it's autumn time and they have all the leaves falling and you just go for drives and you see all the like orange and reds and yellow trees, and it's just really, I don't know, it makes you feel happy inside.
Go kayaking, rafting, abseiling, you know. I've got to say, I've got to love winter. Skiing, snowboarding, it's all good. I'd actually like God to explain how we were created. Explain all our different parts and...
Oh, spiders. I mean, why would you make something with 8 legs and as big as like dinner plates for some of them, and they're just, oh. I would like to say that I have short showers, but that's probably not true.
I'm a huge fan of minimal impact camping, where you take out everything you take in. So for everyone that doesn't do it, I'm after you. So please look after the environment, because I want it for my children.
But I do plant plants sometimes and water them and care. Oh, I wash the car with sponges instead of using hoses.
Some thoughts on creation and the environment here in Edge TV, and of course that's what we're talking about in this episode. A question for you all: what's your favourite kind of experience in the natural outdoors kind of setting?
Snow.
Snow?
I love snow.
Yep, that's
I'm fortunate enough to live close to it, so it's all good.
Cool.
Anything for me with water, like the mighty Murray River. I like going to the Murray and just the cliffs and just feel real close to nature and swimming in it, and also the ocean along the coast, you know, just going, running, feeling the power of the waves crashing, and just, it's really powerful.
Very cool.
Scuba diving was my favourite way to experience nature, because, you know, you see it on film clips and stuff like that of things under the sea, but when you actually go down there and get a perspective of how big and in the tropics how colourful it really is, it's just amazing.
grew up in Singapore, so it's a bit difficult. But my redeeming point is that, well, I think last year I went off hiking to Tasmania, and that was just amazing. It was really out in the wilderness, and there was hardly anybody there, and it was one of the most awesome experiences.
You've been thinking on some of these related topics, Adele. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, I was thinking that, caring for the environment and being green is no longer something that's sort of on the fringes of society. A few years ago, people were sort of, oh, they're the hippies if they care about the environment or something like that. But now environmental responsibility is something that more and more people are getting on board with. Airlines offer carbon offsets for their flights, and more people recycle or free cycle. And even banks want to get in on the act, sort of saying, well, we can send you your statement via email so we don't have to print off stuff, or we don't have to chop down trees. And caring for the environment is nothing new though. Following the creation of the world, God told Adam and Eve that it was their job to be stewards of the earth. And this means managing and caring for it and treating it in the ways that God would want it to be cared for. And obviously that's not going all that well. We've got global warming, climate change, and species of animals and marine life and insects are becoming extinct at an ever-increasing rate. And I think a lot of Christians might say, well, what's the point if God is coming back? He's going to make it all new. Why should we bother? But, God's told us that we need to look after it, and plus the environment's just nicer when we care for it.
Fair enough. I'm sure Scott has something silly to say on this topic. This is Scott Wagner with Scott's Silly Answer on Edge TV.
Why did God create mosquitoes? This question plagues many people. Apart from for the food chain answer, there is something else we must remember. Originally, mosquitoes would have grazed the green pastures of Eden, eating grass just like the lions, pelicans, and naked hermit crabs. With no dead shells to live in, they were naked, but they felt no shame. The original mosquitoes, they flew in flocks of 4 and were made with the intention of providing a soothing quartet of harmony to your ears as you walked through the garden, or even at times when you wanted to fall asleep. Now, obviously and sadly, with the departure from Eden, a sudden change in those once glorious garnishes of creation took place. All that remains now are rude, presumptuous soloists, which you can hear on many summer's nights, whining out their monotonic whee, just like a one-armed person playing a one-string violin. Also on the topic, as noted in Genesis, is that Noah spent quite some time in the ark before the door was opened and all the animals were released to take their speed dating and multiply all over the earth. The duration Noah spent in the ark after the rain stopped has traditionally been thought to have been due to the water taking a long time to recede. Not necessarily. I think it's quite reasonable to assume Noah and co were actually spending all that time hunting down the 2 mozzies on board. While lying in bed at night, locked up in the ark, Noah couldn't just pull out the bug spray and spray up and send them to their spiralling death. We would have lost all manner of nice bugs, like the ladybug, the butterfly, and the ladybug. I'll get back to you. If he could just squish the female, then he knew all of humanity would never, ever again have to hide under a sheet in the tropical humidity of one's breath on a summer's night's flyby. As we all know, after some months the search was called off, probably because the armadillos were cranky for running out of moisturiser. And the door was opened, and to this day we have solo mosquitoes.
On Edge TV, we believe that God created Scott, but Scott made up the silly answers. It's great to have you with us, and I hope you'll stick around for more Edge TV next. Welcome back to the environmental edition of Edge TV, and we're talking about creation and looking after it. Wonderful thing. To get us a bit further in that direction, let's check up with Dave on the Edge.
Hi, this is Dave on the Edge. When I was preparing to do this segment, I was sitting with the other Edge panelists, and one of them jotted something down on my creation environment topic. She jotted these words: "Jesus is coming back. Quick, trash the place." And you know what's unfortunate? She was kidding, of course, but what's unfortunate is that it's the way a lot of Christians treat the world. Is, oh, Jesus is going to fix it one day and it'll be fine, and so it doesn't really matter what we do now. But it does, because Jesus left us here as the stewards of the earth. He gave us this as our divine job to care for this earth. When I was a missionary volunteer in the Marshall Islands, a friend of mine and I were driving down the road and we saw a sign. And every once in a while in foreign countries you see signs that are very funny because they're written in English and the native tongue isn't English, and so they write what they think they've written, but it's different. This sign was next to a rubbish tip, and it was a big sign, and on the fence, because evidently they had trouble with people dumping their rubbish by the fence, they had written, "No dumbing by the fence," rather than "no dumping by the fence." And so we, of course, had to get out and take a picture of ourselves being stupid in front of the sign, making dumb faces because we were dumbing by the fence. But you know, in life, when we ignore our job of looking after creation, we're dumbing by the fence. We're not getting involved. We're ignoring our responsibility to be stewards of the earth. And when we do just a little bit, we're just being a little bit silly by the fence. But when we actually take it seriously and get serious and help the planet, then we're literally not dumping by the fence. We're not being dumb, we're not dumping, we're doing what we've been asked to do. We're being good stewards of God's earth. And when he comes back, yes, he is going to make all things new, but he's also going to hold us accountable for what we've done. And I'd like to be able to say, I tried to make it a better place while I was here, and I'm sure you would as well. This has been Dave by the Edge. Where do you stand?
Thanks, Dave, for your thoughts once again on Edge TV.
You're welcome.
Very cool. A question: does it matter how the world was created or how the world began?
Well, it's kind of the foundation of what you believe. You know, where you believe you came from tends to affect the way you live your life. So I think it does matter. Yeah.
To me, if God created everything, then that, like you were saying before, we do have responsibilities, and we have to, you know, keep that in mind. And also, it gives me, I guess, what's the word? Contentment, or within myself, that I know that I am created and there must be a purpose behind that.
Okay, yep. We start off the Bible, and I read somewhere somebody making the comment that we have this statement in the beginning of the Bible: in the beginning God created. And then we start bickering about how that happened and what might have happened, and this thing, one comment I read on it was that that statement alone should leave us just sitting in awe and wonder for as long as we've got before we even get to creating about, you know, arguing about how that might have happened or whatever. So does it matter how God created or when God created or some of these other things that creationists and evolutionists and people like that spend a lot of time arguing about? Does it really matter?
Probably not.
Why
I guess,
do you say that?
well, I mean, when you think about it, it's, in the grand scheme of things, it really isn't an issue for me. God created, how he created it, it's probably just too intense for me to understand anyway. So I think I've got other things to worry about.
I like the idea, though, that God created everything in such a short, period of time, because it just makes him so much more awesome. Like, it's so impressive that he can just say, "Let there be light," and there's suddenly light where there was nothing before. And that sort of thing. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Robert Jandel, an astrophysicist, says that people looking for the meaning of life, and only taking reason as the answer, and looking for more and more and more reason, that it's like this guy climbing up this mountain, and he finally gets to the top, and he looks over the top crag, and there's a bunch of theologians sitting there who've been there for a long time already, and they say, "Hi, you found us." So it's kind of the idea that we're all looking for the answer, and some of us have already found it. And science, of course, deals with things differently, but creationists or believers are saying, well, we believe we were created. We believe it was started by God.
Probably the key element is simply the element of intentionality, that God planned it. Maybe there are some, while the Bible says that God created the world, and we accept that as a representation of how it happened, probably some of the nailing down the exact science of it is perhaps really beyond what we need for faith in God as the originator and designer and purpose of the world. It's a big kind of topic, and to explore it a bit further, we asked Clancy Rogers to check out what the Bible has to say.
At the very beginning of the Bible, in the first chapters of the first book, we are told that the world began with God. He is described as the ultimate creative power, the instigator of human life, and the designer of the natural world. We see God as the being who creates life and beauty and all good things. He creates man in his own image, places him in a garden home, and then gives him the responsibility for looking after or stewarding creation. Stewards were people who looked after the estate of a great lord or the kingdom of a ruler. A steward would make sure that everything was running well, as the king or lord would have it run. And here in the story of beginnings, we find that the great ruler or king of the universe gives man the job of looking after his earth. Soon after this is, of course, the story of the fall of man into sin, and part of the consequence being the fall of nature. Genesis 3 calls the ground cursed and describes the changes that sin brings in, thorns and thistles and hard labour required to grow food. It is a picture of what happens when things do not go according to God's will. But what happens when things do? There are some amazing pictures in the Bible which describe the whole landscape reacting when God's plan comes to fruit. Isaiah 35 verse 1-2 says, "The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It will burst into bloom. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy." And in Isaiah 55, we are told that when God's purposes are accomplished, that God's people will go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills will burst into song, and all of the trees of the field will clap their hands. In Romans chapter 8, Paul speaks about creation groaning and waiting for the salvation of man, for the final renewal of all things. We are God's agents here on earth. We are the ones who are charged with the care of his creation. Although we are told that this world is fallen, there is still great beauty in the earth. We can see it all around us, and it is obviously something that God cares about. As people made in the image of God, we should care about what he cares about, and the earth is one of those things. I'm Clancy Rogers for Edge TV.
Edge TV, and we're talking environmentalism, tree hugging and creation. What a fun set of topics. Now, one of the interesting things when I read the Old Testament, I discover that so much of when people want to talk about how great God is, they start describing things in the natural world. And I guess a lot of the Psalms are a bit like that, but probably the biggest example of that is the book of Job, where Job has this big question about God and what's fair and what's right, and God says to him, check out the world I created. Do you understand? Were you there? How do you think of this idea of, or what do you think about this idea of finding God through the natural world? Is that important?
I used to feel a bit underprivileged coming from Singapore.
Oh, we're back to that.
It's true. Well, all I see is skyscrapers, and it's like, well, obviously I can't find God then. But, well, I mean, that's...
Is that why you had your bonsai tree?
Yes, that's my friend. No, but seriously though, it's actually quite true. When I stepped out of the whole concrete jungle that I was in and being out in the open, it is amazing. I mean, when you look at the birds, when you look at all the different colors the birds have and all the flowers, and you sit back and you wonder, number one, what was God thinking? And number two, he must have a sense of humor, and he's just amazing to be able to do something like that.
Yeah, that's cool. What do you think?
I was thinking about the Job thing, and if the God moment with Job was happening today, and it was some person today that, he used things in their world that they were just in awe of because they hadn't discovered how the eagle could fly or how the sea beasts could be so big, That today it would probably be, God would talk to a cosmologist about space, you know, and the amazingness of it, or to a microbiologist about, you know, the string theory or something, and say, oh, string theory, let me tell you what's really going on, you know. Do you think you understand? Let me talk to you about it, what it really is. And I just think God knows that what he knows is so much bigger and so much more fine than what we can ever understand.
I think as humans we've always been looking for God in nature. Like if you look at all the religions, for example the Australian Aboriginals and stuff, they find most of their religion is based on the world around them. There's God in everything, the rocks, the trees, the animals, and they interact with the world. And we've always looked for God and for meaning in the world around us. It gives us, you know, and people studied the stars for, you know, centuries and tried to get meaning from that, tried to find something in nature that could answer their big questions. And I think that it does. If you point the signs and you believe as we believe, we can see the signs. It's like big signposts pointing, neon lights, that God is great and God has created it.
Sounds very natural. Maybe that fits back with Melody's
Fireflies, there's fireflies floating.
Fair enough.
Well, I think it is. It's a reflection of God. You know, we're made in God's image as people, and you know, as an extension, the rest of creation is, you know, the reflection of God's handiwork and His abilities. And you know, you look at that, and a lot of it is so incredible. All of it is so incredible. You know, even the simplest things are so complicated, and that's what makes it so amazing, I think.
So when we look at what we've talked about so far, God's creation and how God is reflected and God is praised by His creation in different ways, what does that say about our responsibility to care for the environment and care for our world?
Well, yeah, as I was saying earlier, God charged Adam and Eve with being stewards of the earth. And it didn't just stop with them. You know, it's meant to continue on through all people who live on earth, you know, to look after it. And it's not just because it'll, you know, look a bit better, but it's because it's a healthier place for us when we look after our environment. You know, if we've got, you know, pollution in the air, it makes it harder for us to breathe. It's, you know, less positive health outcomes overall. You know, so if we keep our environment clean, we're going to live better lives, probably be able to connect better with God.
I think it says a lot about our own maturity as well. You know, when you're a kid and your mom says, clean your room, you're like, oh, I got to clean my room. But then when you grow up and your mom's not there anymore, you know, as a kid, you'd be, oh, mom's not here, I don't have to clean my room. She's not going to be here till 10 o'clock this morning, so I won't clean my room until 9:30. You know, where when you're a grown-up, you keep your room and your house clean because it's a principle of healthy living. And as grown-ups spiritually, the same is true with our greater environment, that it's ours to care for, and to say, oh, someone else will do it, or oh, nobody's really watching, so I don't have to do anything. You know, I can throw it out the window if I want to. Or it just shows where we're at. We're, you know, environmental children rather than being grown-ups.
One of the things that's often been assumed from a Christian perspective is if you have this belief that Jesus is going to come back and the world will be destroyed and whatever, that it's not worth worrying about the environment, and it almost even goes to a further extreme of let's use it all up as quick as we can, and because then God will have to come back and fix it. Yeah, it's a weird kind of thinking. What do you think about, you know, is that an excuse to just trust that God will make it okay and not, you know, not worry about it now?
But doesn't it say in Revelation somewhere that, you know, he who destroys the earth, I will destroy? You know, God's saying that.
In Revelation 11,
yeah. And so you sort of think, well, yeah, God does take it seriously, and, you know, us trashing it won't make him come back any quicker. You know, it's just us making a mess of things.
And what kind of responsible parent would that be if God came back because we were making a mess? It's like, well, I better cut my time, you know, I'll cut time short because they're a bunch of useless kids. It makes a lot more sense that he says they're ready for me to return, and so then he returns.
I like to think about, you know, if someone made you a really nice hand-knitted jumper, you're going to look after it. And yes, maybe the person who made you the first jumper is in the process of making another one for you. Are you going to not look after the first one that you've been given? Not really.
That's a good illustration.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously from how the Bible explains it, and when God talks about, as we've already mentioned in Job, it's something that's obviously pretty important to God. God says, you know, I care about this. And if we care about God, we care about what He cares about. And I mean, even you look at things like, you know, if a sparrow falls, God sees it. And that's a huge kind of responsibility God takes because He cares. Jared, what can we do to think about this a little bit further?
Well, all of our archival magazines are on the internet. So if you go to www.edgeonweb.org, you will find the Great Wall of Edge. And on the Great Wall of Edge, if you go to issue 72, it is an issue that's all about the environment and the what we should do as Christians, our responsibility to look after it. So check that out on www.edgeonweb.org.
Very cool stuff. We have there's so much more we could talk about, and of course there's so many ways that people who are concerned about the environment make a difference in the world, and I think it's something we as Christians should be concerned about and should be work with others in our community and in our world who are working in that kind of direction. It's something that God says we should do right from the beginning of the world. If you're interested in being a part of this, if you're interested in doing what Edge always says of believing in Christ and live the life, you'll work towards making the world a better place. God promises to recreate the world perfectly one day. If we believe that, we ought to practice looking after it now.